Some stories don't begin with a sunrise. They begin in the shadows, in the silence where something fragile is about to break. If you've ever believed that survival isn't just about fire and food, but about the fight to keep hope alive, then this tale is for you. And if that rings true, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the stories told here aren't polished with lace and ribbon. They're carved from bone, wind, and the wild. The last time Clara Hayes remembered feeling safe was 3 days before, when her horse still carried her through the thinning woods, and her satchel still held biscuits wrapped in linen. Now the horse was gone. Its screams still haunted her ears as the river swelled and dragged it under, and the satchel was half empty, its remaining contents soaked to paste. The storm had taken everything else: her compass, her sense of direction, her will to pretend she was in control. I tell you this because sometimes people imagine the wilderness is romantic, that it greets you with sunsets and fresh air. They don't hear how a mountain storm laughs at your plans, how it rips the map from your hands, how it leaves you stumbling in circles until the trees themselves look like enemies. The first night alone, Clara tried to keep count of the hours by the moon, but clouds drowned the sky. She found a hollow between two stones and huddled there, shivering as the rain seeped through her dress. Her fingers clutched at her shawl like it was a lifeline, though the wool was so sodden it felt like ice. Every sound became a predator: the snap of a twig, the roll of thunder, the distant howl that could have been a wolf or only the wind. I can tell you from watching her. She hadn't come west expecting ease, but she hadn't come expecting despair either. And by the second night, despair was all she had left. On the third day, when the sun finally broke through the clouds, Clara staggered into a clearing and thought she might weep just from seeing her own shadow again. Her lips were split from cold, her boots squelched with each step, and her stomach clawed at her with hunger. She tore bark from a pine and chewed it just to fool her body into silence. Her eyes were red, raw from tears and smoke she'd tried, and failed, to make from damp kindling. But even then, even at her weakest, something stubborn kept her moving forward. She had been told all her life that women of her sort, educated, delicate, bred for parlors and pianofortes, wouldn't last a week out here. Perhaps that was true, but Clara Hayes would rather die walking than crawl back to St. Louis in shame. The mountain was both cruel and merciful in its indifference. Streams trickled clear enough to drink, though she had to break through crusts of ice to reach them. Fallen berries stained her fingers, their bitter taste a reminder that survival wasn't guaranteed. Her path wound higher, into country that grew wilder with each step: steeper slopes, thicker bramble, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears until she wondered if she was already half dead. She thought of her father then, the man who'd once told her that a mind trained on books was no use in the raw world. She remembered the laughter of her sisters when she'd insisted she could make a life for herself, out where men carved homesteads from the wilderness. They had called her foolish, reckless, unfit. And perhaps they had been right. That was when she saw it: a thin curl of smoke, rising faintly against the tree line ahead. Her heart lurched so hard she nearly fell to her knees. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. And people meant salvation. She gathered what remained of her strength and stumbled toward it, each step both agony and hope. The forest seemed to resist her, branches clawing at her skirt, roots waiting to twist her ankles. But she pushed forward until she broke through a line of pines and saw it: a cabin. Not a grand house, not even the sort of homestead she'd imagined in her fantasies, but a squat, rough-hewn structure of logs darkened by years of weather. A lean-to sagged at the side, stacked with chopped wood. The chimney puffed that miracle of smoke, and the clearing around it was swept clean in a way that told her someone cared for this place, someone strong enough to bend the wilderness to their will. Relief swelled in her chest, so sharp it hurt. Clara staggered to the door, raised her trembling hand, and knocked. Once, twice, then a third time. For a moment there was only silence, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She thought maybe the place was abandoned, that she had only seen a ghost of smoke rising from coals long cold. She pressed her forehead against the wood, whispered a prayer she barely remembered the words to, and then the door swung open. He filled the frame like a shadow carved from the mountain itself. Tall, far taller than any man she had known in her city life, with shoulders broad enough to block the light. His beard was dark, streaked with gray at the edges, and his eyes were the color of the river in spring flood, sharp and cold. In his hands he held a rifle, casual but ready, the barrel angled down only slightly, as if he hadn't yet decided whether she was a threat worth shooting. For the first time in 3 days, Clara found her voice. It came out cracked, hoarse, but steady enough to say the only words she could manage. "Please, don't send me away." And though her knees threatened to give out beneath her, she held her ground before him, knowing with a clarity that cut through her exhaustion that this moment, this man, was the dividing line between her life and her death. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than words, and the silence between Clara Hayes and the mountain man was heavy enough to smother the air. She stood in the doorway of his cabin, drenched, shaking, every breath fogging in the cold, while he regarded her like something dragged in from the storm. His rifle didn't lift, but it didn't lower either, and the seconds stretched until her pulse felt like it was hammering in her ears. "You're trespassing," he said at last, voice low and gravelly, like rock grinding on rock. "I didn't mean to," Clara rasped. "My horse is gone. I've been walking for days. If you turn me out, I won't last the night." His eyes swept over her, hollow cheeks, torn dress, trembling hands, and still they were as hard as river stone. "You should have stayed with your kind. These mountains don't care for soft folk." The word stung, though no more than the storm already had. She was weary of being called weak, weary of being underestimated. Something stubborn straightened her spine. "Then let me stay," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I'll make it worthwhile." Something flickered in his expression, there and gone again like firelight. Without another word, he stepped aside. Inside, she stumbled through the threshold, collapsing near the hearth. The heat was almost painful against her frozen skin. Smoke and pine filled her lungs as though she were breathing life itself for the first time in days. Behind her, the man hung the rifle above the mantel, though his hand lingered close. He was not a man who trusted easily. "Name," he said, flat, like an order. Clara Hayes." He paused. "Silas." Just that. A single word, given reluctantly, as though his name itself was something strangers had no right to. He crossed the cabin, filled a tin cup from a jug, and set it before her. She drank greedily, and he refilled it without a word. Only then, with her body thawing and her heart still racing, did she dare to look at him fully. His chest rose and fell like someone accustomed to deep silence. His face was rugged, scarred, shadowed by a thick beard. His arms were roped with muscle, the strength of a man who worked, fought, and endured. Everything about him was shaped by this wilderness. And yet, beneath the severity, she thought she glimpsed something else, something restrained, buried deep. "I can work," she said suddenly, desperate to convince him. "I can cook, mend, keep a home. I can read, even teach. Just don't send me back out there. I've nowhere else to go." Silas leaned against the table, arms crossed, his gaze steady on her. The fire snapped between them, the only sound in the cabin. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened only a fraction. "You're here now? Well, see if you last." It wasn't mercy, not kindness, just a reprieve. But to Clara, it was salvation. For the first time in days, she was not alone. For the first time in days, she had a chance. And in her heart, she swore that whatever price this mountain man might one day demand, she would find a way to pay it. The days that followed were not gentle. The mountain did not soften simply because Clara had found a roof and a fire. Instead, it tested her anew, demanding she haul water from the creek with numb fingers, sweep snow from the cabin roof before it collapsed, and scrub iron pots until her hands were raw. Silas gave no easy praise, but neither did he scorn her efforts. He simply watched, measured, and when she failed, he corrected with the bluntness of a man who had no patience for weakness. At first, Clara thought he would grow tired of her and send her away. But slowly, so slowly she almost missed it, his silence shifted. When she burned bread, he ate it anyway. When her stitches wavered in the mending of his shirts, he wore them without complaint. And when she rose before dawn to feed the fire, she found the woodpile always stacked a little higher than she'd left it. These were not gestures of affection, not yet, but they were cracks in the stone wall he wore around his heart. Then came the night of the wolves. Hunger had driven them down from higher ridges, their howls slicing through the trees until the cabin trembled with sound. Silas stood ready at the door, rifle in hand, while Clara crouched by the fire, clutching the pistol he'd placed in her grasp. He hadn't asked if she could use it. He had only said, "If they break through, you don't hesitate." Fear clawed her throat, but when the snarling shapes pressed against the door, she did not drop the gun. She held steady as the mountain man beside her. By dawn, the wolves were gone, leaving the snow churned red. Silas's shirt was torn, his arm gashed where teeth had found him, and Clara's hands shook as she cleaned the wound. He bore the pain without flinching, though his eyes lingered on her face as she worked, eyes softer now, filled with something unspoken. When she finally tied the bandage and sat back, he said only, "You didn't run." It was not praise. It was recognition. That night, as the wind howled outside, Clara realized what she had not dared admit before. She had not only survived the mountain, she had begun to belong to it. And in that belonging, she had begun to belong to him. Weeks later, when the thaw came and the first shoots of green pierced the snow, Clara stood outside the cabin and breathed the sharp air. Behind her, Silas stacked wood with his steady, deliberate rhythm. He looked at her once, as though the sight of her framed by the wild pines unsettled something in him, and she thought she saw the faintest ghost of a smile. Their arrangement had never been spoken of again. She had pleaded to stay, he had allowed it, and between them grew not promises, but proof, in shared labor, in long silences, in the simple act of surviving side by side. No vows, no declarations. Only a truth as solid as the mountain itself, that in the wilderness, where life could be lost in a single night, they had found something far rarer than safety. They had found each other.